The dry cleaner looked at me and whispered, "Take your grandkids and run." I stood there with my arms full of clothes, still warm from the press, when Mr. Adler, who'd been cleaning my family's clothes for 30 years, leaned in close and said it with a tremble in his voice. His eyes darted towards the parking lot, where my daughter-in-law Samantha sat waiting in the car, sunglasses on, tapping the wheel with impatience. I didn't understand. Not yet. But something in his face, fear, urgency, sorrow, made my stomach twist. "Why would you say that?" I whispered. He shook his head, and for a moment he looked so much older than I remembered. "Just look inside the pockets," he said softly, pressing the plastic-wrapped bundle into my hands. And then he stepped back and smiled like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just cracked open the first thread in the tapestry of my life. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and share where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. That evening, with Samantha gone and the kids upstairs watching their cartoons, I sat at the kitchen table and slowly peeled back the dry cleaner's plastic. The familiar scent of lavender starch rose like a ghost of calmer times. My son Mark's dress shirt, Samantha's beige blouse, and the children's little church outfits, all neatly folded. I started checking the pockets, half hoping it was just some senile mistake. Mark's shirt held nothing but lint and a gum wrapper. The blouse, empty. But then, in the small coat belonging to my granddaughter Ella, I felt something flat and stiff. It was a printed email, folded twice, worn at the edges. I read it once, then again, my hands starting to tremble. Samantha had written to someone named Carla H. Her words were casual, almost smug. "Once she signs the house over, we'll get her into assisted living. She won't even know what hit her. Mark just needs to convince her it's for her safety. Old people fall for that stuff all the time." My heart squeezed. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The room felt cold, the lavender scent now nauseating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan, a betrayal. My own son. Or was it just Samantha? No. Mark knew. He had to know. I folded the paper again with care, as if it might crumble from the weight of its own cruelty. That night, I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the muffled giggles of Ella and Jamie through the wall. My room, once shared with my late husband Harold, had become my only refuge. The walls still held his scent, pipe tobacco and peppermint. I touched the photo on my nightstand, the one from 1974. Harold in his army uniform, me in a blue dress, he said made my eyes look like morning skies. We had built this house together, nail by nail, dream by dream. Now they wanted to take it from me. Samantha, with her tight smile and cold perfume. And Mark, my sweet boy who once cried because a bird fell from a tree. I looked at the email again. There was no mistake, no gray area. Samantha was planning to put me in a home. She called it assisted living, but I'd visited those places. They smelled like bleach and loneliness. And the way she wrote it, like I was a burden, an obstacle to her lifestyle. I had cooked every holiday meal, babysat the kids, paid for their first house deposit, and now they wanted me gone, tucked away like a dusty heirloom no one wanted on display. My hand trembled as I tucked the paper under Harold's photo frame. I wasn't ready to fight, but I wasn't going to vanish quietly. The next morning, I opened the bottom drawer of Harold's old dresser, the one he'd told me never to get rid of, even after it lost a leg and leaned like a tired man. Beneath a stack of wool scarves and forgotten socks, I found it, the necklace. A delicate gold chain with a locket no bigger than a thumbprint. Inside it, a picture of Mark as a baby on one side and Harold on the other, both smiling with the same dimple. I hadn't worn it in years. It felt too precious, like wearing my heart outside my body. I held it in my palm for a long time. The locket was warm, as if it still remembered the warmth of the men it held. Harold had given it to me when we first moved into the house. So you'll never forget why we built this place, he'd said, kissing my forehead. Now it became something more, not just a memory, a tether, a reason. I slipped it around my neck, and it nestled just under my collarbone, close to where the ache sat. Downstairs, I heard Samantha's voice, sharp and impatient, as she scolded Jamie for spilling juice. Mark said nothing, just like always. I stayed in my room, watching the way the morning light touched the edges of the locket. I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet, but something had shifted. I was no longer just a mother trying to keep the peace. I was a woman who had been warned. I made coffee, I said softly, as I placed the steaming mugs on the table. Samantha didn't look up from her phone. Mark gave me a tight nod, but his eyes never met mine. Jamie reached for a banana, his small hand brushing against mine. "Thanks, Grandma," he whispered. Ella smiled at me too, her quiet way of saying she still saw me. Samantha took a sip, wrinkled her nose. "It's strong," she muttered, pushing the mug aside. "I use the same blend I always have," I replied, sitting down. "Maybe your tastes have changed." She didn't answer, just clicked her nails against the phone screen. Mark finally spoke. "Mom, I was thinking, maybe we should look into a smaller place for you. You know, fewer stairs. Something safer." There it was, the rehearsal. The soft start to something cruel. I stirred my coffee slowly. "Is that what you were thinking? Or what someone told you to think?" Samantha scoffed. "No one's trying to hurt you, Diane. We're just concerned." I looked at Mark. Really looked at him. His face was pale, jaw clenched. Guilt lived just beneath his skin. But he didn't speak. Jamie dropped his spoon. The clang broke the silence. I stood. "I've lived here for 43 years. If these stairs haven't killed me yet, I doubt they ever will." I walked out before they could respond. The necklace brushed against my chest as I climbed the stairs. The weight of love and the weight of what I now knew. Later that week, Samantha handed me a folded paper before she left for work. "Here, we're out of almond milk and the kids want those fruit pouches." I opened it, a grocery list, scribbled without a please or thank you. At the bottom, she'd added, "Get something for yourself if you must." If I must, like I was an afterthought, like the woman who once sold her wedding ring to pay their mortgage needed permission to buy bread. Still, I took the list and went. The grocery store had become the only place where I could breathe without their eyes on me. I moved slowly through the aisles, touching the items like I used to when Mark was little. Cheerios, toothpaste, peanut butter. It all reminded me of simpler battles, ones I fought with love. At the register, I added a small tub of vanilla ice cream. Not for them, for me. The cashier, a young woman with pink braids and a lip ring, smiled. "That locket's beautiful," she said. I touched it gently. "It holds my boys," I replied. "You wear it like armor," she said, scanning the last item. And she was right. Back at home, Samantha barely glanced at the bags. "Finally," she muttered, then louder, "You forgot the gluten-free crackers." I hadn't. I just didn't want to carry her cruelty in my hands anymore. "I'll add it to the list," I said, turning away. But inside, something was growing. Not bitterness. Something sharper, calmer, ready. On Sunday, while Samantha took the kids to some influencer brunch and Mark stayed glued to his laptop, I crept into the attic. The wooden ladder creaked under my weight, and dust danced in the shafts of sunlight like old secrets waiting to be stirred. I hadn't been up there since Harold passed. The air smelled like cedar, old books, and time. Boxes labeled Christmas and Mark's school surrounded me like silent sentinels. I reached for the chest in the corner, Harold's chest, the one with the leather straps and brass latch. Inside, under folded uniforms and yellowed newspaper clippings, were the letters. Decades of them. Letters Harold wrote to me during his tours. Letters I wrote but never sent, the ones filled with fear, longing, and hope. One envelope, sealed and addressed in his bold hand, was marked. If anything happens. My throat closed. I held it to my chest, feeling the outline of the paper inside. I didn't open it, not yet. Beside it, a smaller box. Inside it, our wedding rings. I thought I'd lost mine. I slipped it on. It didn't fit like it used to, but it still meant what it always had. Love, sacrifice, promises. I stayed there for hours, reading the words of a man who had always protected me. And suddenly, I knew. I had stayed quiet for too long. Not just about the betrayal, but about everything. Harold may be gone, but I wasn't alone, and I wasn't done. 2 days later, I came downstairs to find balloons, cake boxes, and loud laughter. At first I thought they were surprising me. Maybe someone remembered. But it wasn't for me. It was for Samantha's friend. A last-minute girls' brunch, she said with a smirk. We'll just use the dining room, Diane. Don't worry, we'll clean up after. I stood in the doorway, still in my slippers, as strangers walked into my home like it belonged to someone else. They dropped coats on my heirloom chair, set wine glasses on Harold's carved side table. One woman even asked, "Oh, are you the housekeeper?" "No," I said, my voice flat. "I built this house." She blinked, confused, then laughed awkwardly and moved away. I watched Samantha lead them around, showing off her kitchen, her garden. When she called my antique teacups vintage finds, something inside me cracked. Mark said nothing, sitting with his beer, pretending not to see me, or maybe hoping I would just disappear. I retreated to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. No one noticed. Later, I sat on the back porch, watching as Samantha's friends toasted to new chapters and letting go of old baggage. They meant me. I fingered the locket, its edge pressing into my skin. I remembered Harold's letters, the sealed ones still unopened in my nightstand. They wanted me out. But this house was filled with my years, my love, my grief, my strength. I wouldn't vanish. It was the day after the party when I noticed it. Jamie was in the living room building a spaceship from blocks, his little fingers clumsy with focus. He reached for a piece, and his sleeve slipped back, a bruise, dark, oval-shaped, blooming like a shadow on the inside of his arm. I knelt beside him. "Sweetheart, what happened?" He froze. That tiny pause before a child decides whether to lie. "I fell," he mumbled, eyes darting toward the kitchen. I knew better. A mother always knows. A grandmother sees even more. "Jamie," I said softly. "Was it Mommy?" He didn't answer, just picked up a block and began building faster. His hands trembled. My stomach turned. I waited until bedtime. After Mark and Samantha argued upstairs, something about bills and her tone, I crept into Jamie's room. I knelt beside his bed, pulled the blanket up over his chest. "You can tell me anything," I whispered. His eyes, so much like Mark's when he was little, met mine. "She said if I told, you'd go away." I swallowed hard. "No one's sending me anywhere," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded barely. Back in my room, I clutched the necklace and the sealed letter from Harold. I thought this was just about me, about the house, but they were hurting my grandchildren too. The betrayal was no longer quiet. It had bruises, and it had a deadline. That night, I rummaged through the storage closet where we kept old electronics and half-dead chargers. Tucked in a small box labeled Vacation Tech, I found what I was looking for. A tiny camcorder we had used for Christmases years ago, back when laughter still echoed through this house. It still worked. I set it on the shelf in the hallway, angled just right to catch the kitchen and the edge of the living room. Not hidden exactly, but subtle. Mark wouldn't notice. Samantha never looked at anything that didn't reflect her own image. The next morning I made pancakes, the kind Jamie loved, with cinnamon swirls and powdered sugar snow. Samantha walked in mid-bite, took one look at the scene, and sneered. "He doesn't need sugar," she snapped, snatching the plate from Jamie's hands. "You spoil him." Jamie flinched. Ella looked down at her lap. Mark, as always, remained silent behind his phone. I didn't argue. I just stood there, the locket warm against my chest, while the camcorder blinked silently from the hallway shelf. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the footage. Clear as day, the harshness in her voice, Jamie's shrinking posture, Mark's indifference. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was evidence. I transferred the files onto a flash drive and labeled it with one word: truth. I placed it in the back of my drawer, behind the letter and the locket box. Not for revenge, for protection, for justice. 3 days later, while Samantha was at her yoga class and Mark had taken a work call on the patio, more like hiding from his life, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 60s with thick gray eyebrows and a kind face. He held a small garment bag and a look of concern. "Mrs. Diane Wilson?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Henry Adler. I own Adler's Cleaners." He glanced over his shoulder. "Can I speak with you?" "Privately." I nodded and let him in, closing the door gently behind him. We stood in the hallway, sunlight streaking across the hardwood. "I shouldn't be here," he began, voice low. "But after what I saw in that coat pocket, I couldn't sleep." I nodded. I read the email. His shoulders relaxed. "Good. Then you understand why I had to say something. That woman, your daughter-in-law, she came in yesterday with more clothes. I overheard her on the phone. She said, and I quote, 'Another month, and the house is ours. The old bat's finally giving in.'" My jaw clenched, but I stayed still. "Mr. Adler," I said quietly, "would you be willing to say that again, if it came to it?" He hesitated. Then, without a word, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a handwritten note with a date and the words he overheard. "I already wrote it down," he said, "just in case." Tears welled in my eyes. I wasn't invisible. Someone saw me, believed me, and now I wasn't alone. That evening, as I stirred lentils on the stove, Samantha came storming into the kitchen, heels clicking like gunshots. "Did you see my gold earrings? The ones from Italy?" she barked, flinging open drawers. I turned slowly. "No, I don't go through your things," she scoffed. "Well, someone did. They were on my dresser and now they're gone." I watched her, her movements frantic, her irritation oddly theatrical. Mark trailed in behind her, rubbing his temple like a man exhausted by the noise of his own life. "I'm sure they'll turn up," he mumbled. "No, they won't," she snapped. "Not unless your mother gives them back." And just like that, the accusation hung in the air. I didn't raise my voice. "I haven't touched your things. Maybe you should check the bathroom. Last time you lost something, it was behind the sink." She glared. "How convenient." Mark sighed, shifting uncomfortably. "Can we just not do this right now?" But I saw it, the seed she was trying to plant, that I was forgetful, that I was maybe even stealing. I looked at Samantha and saw more than cruelty. I saw calculation. If she couldn't push me out with kindness, she'd do it with suspicion, with whispers. She wanted me labeled, senile, unstable, unfit. But I wasn't losing anything. Not my mind, not my home, and certainly not to a woman who saw family as obstacles. I stirred the pot once more, slowly. "The earrings will show up," I said. "Truth always does." That Sunday, Samantha insisted we all sit down for dinner, something she rarely did unless there was a performance to stage. The table was set with polished silver and wine glasses too delicate for children's hands. She served roast chicken and quinoa salad like it was a peace offering, but the tightness in her jaw said otherwise. Mark made small talk. "Jamie scored 2 goals in soccer," he said with a half smile. "That's wonderful," I replied, reaching to pat Jamie's hand. Samantha's eyes flicked to my fingers. "Careful, Diane. You almost spilled the wine." It was water. But I said nothing. Ella quietly placed her napkin in her lap, watching her mother the way animals watch the sky before a storm. Halfway through the meal, Samantha stood up suddenly and clinked her glass. I think it's time we talk about the future." Mark shifted in his seat. "I found a lovely assisted living place in Maple Grove," she continued. "Very clean, safe, activities for seniors. We just want what's best for you, Diane." I stared at my plate. Jamie stopped chewing. "But Grandma lives here." Mark cleared his throat. "It's just the stairs, Mom, and you've been tired lately." There it was. The setup, the false concern, the staged intervention. I placed my fork down. "Is this why you invited me to dinner? To evict me with dessert?" Samantha smirked. "We're trying to be reasonable." I looked around the table, then down at my locket. "You don't get to decide my ending," I said softly. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I stood by the kitchen window, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The moonlight spilled across the counter, catching the edge of the flash drive I had tucked into the sugar bowl earlier that day. Still labeled Truth. I picked it up, held it tight in my palm. I knew what I had to do. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Grace Carrington, Harold's old friend from the church board. She used to be a lawyer before she retired, but her mind was as sharp as ever and her sense of justice even sharper. "Diane." Her voice cracked through the speaker like a warm blanket. "Grace, I need help, and I think you're the only one who will believe me. Tell me everything," she said without hesitation. I did. About the email in Ella's coat, the bruises, the threats, the fake kindness, the manipulation, about Samantha's plan and Mark's silence. Grace didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she simply said, "I want you to bring everything. The letter, the video, the email. And Diane." "Yes?" "Don't let them see your fear. That's what they're feeding on." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. From knowing someone still saw the woman I was, not the old shadow they tried to paint me as. I looked at Harold's photo on the wall. I wasn't going to let them bury me while I still breathed. The next morning, I moved with quiet precision. While Samantha was out dropping Ella at a dance class and Mark sat half asleep over his laptop, I went into their bedroom. I'd never entered without knocking, but that courtesy had expired the moment she called me a liar. Her jewelry box was on the dresser, glass-lidded faux velvet inside. I opened it. The earrings were there, nestled in the corner beneath a row of bracelets. She'd hidden them, or forgotten where she put them. Either way, she'd accused me. I didn't take them, I didn't even touch them. Instead, I opened my own jewelry box back in my room. Inside, among brooches and Harold's cufflinks, was a tiny velvet pouch. The earrings Harold gave me on our 20th anniversary. Real pearls, soft as moonlight. I brought them back to her dresser and set them beside her things. Let her find them. Let her wonder. Let her story unravel without a word from me. Back in the hallway, I passed Jamie's room. He was coloring, his tongue poking out in concentration. "You okay, honey?" I asked. He nodded. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" "Of course." I looked at him, that soft little face, and I thought, everything I do now is for them, for their safety, for their memory of me, not as someone who disappeared quietly, but as someone who stood her ground with calm, with faith, with truth, and a little silent revenge. That afternoon, I returned to the attic, where dust lived like another layer of memory, and opened the cedar box Harold had carved by hand. It creaked like a secret being remembered. Inside, beneath our wedding certificate and faded Christmas cards, was the envelope I hadn't touched in years. Labeled in Harold's handwriting, "Revised Will, private copy." My fingers trembled as I opened it. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still bold. Dated 4 months before he passed. "In the event of my death, my wife Diane shall retain sole ownership of the house until her death or decision to sell. Under no circumstance shall it be sold, transferred, or signed over without her written consent. Our grandchildren may inherit, but not their parents." I covered my mouth, tears spilling. Harold had known. Even then, he had known Samantha, maybe even Mark's weakness, and he'd done what he could, quietly, like he always did, protecting me long after he was gone. This was the lifeline I didn't know I had. I placed the will beside the flash drive in a small folder, marked it personal. My proof, my shield. From the attic window, I could see Samantha pulling into the driveway, sunglasses on, phone in hand. She had no idea what waited for her inside this house. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming what I'd built, what Harold and I had protected, and what I would no longer allow them to take. That evening after dinner, Samantha waited until Mark left the room before planting her next seed. "Diane," she said sweetly, "you forgot to turn off the oven again." I blinked. I didn't use the oven today. She tilted her head, mock concern on her face. "That's the second time this week. I'm just saying, maybe we should look into someone checking on you." There it was, the trap, laid softly, wrapped in feigned worry. I met her gaze. "You know, Samantha, it's funny. I was just thinking how often you forget where you leave your things. Earrings, keys, phone." Her smile twitched. "That's different." "Is it?" Before she could reply, Jamie ran in. "Grandma, you said we could make banana bread." "I sure did," I said, rising slowly. "But I guess I'll need to double-check the oven." Jamie giggled. Samantha's jaw clenched. I baked with the kids that night. Their laughter mixing with the scent of cinnamon and warm sugar felt like home again. Like my home. Later, when they were tucked in, I slipped into the living room where Mark sat alone. "You know what she's doing," I said quietly. He looked at me, tired, torn. She thinks she's helping." "No, Mark," I said firmly. "She thinks she's winning." I left him there, surrounded by his silence. Upstairs, I placed the flash drive and the will into a padded envelope. I would deliver it the next morning. Grace was waiting, and so was Justice. The next morning, I stood outside St. Luke's Church with the padded envelope pressed to my chest. Grace had asked to meet there, said something about wanting to bring this matter into the light. The old stone steps were still cool from the night before. Autumn leaves scattered at my feet, brittle and gold, like the remnants of something once beautiful. She arrived with her usual stride, cane in one hand, leather portfolio in the other. "Diane," she said warmly, taking my hand, "you look taller." "I feel taller," I whispered. We sat on the bench beside the chapel garden. I handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully. The will, the email printout, the notarized testimony from Mr. Adler, and the flash drive. She nodded slowly as she reviewed each piece, eyes narrowing like a hawk over prey. "This is more than enough," she said. Samantha's manipulation, Mark's negligence, the physical and emotional impact, it's a pattern. They can't push you out, Diane. Not legally, not morally. And the children? She softened. If we move wisely, we can position you as guardian in the event of escalation. I'll prepare everything. Tears brimmed in my eyes, not from fear this time, from power. Quiet, earned, righteous power. Grace closed the folder and reached for my hand. "You've done the hard part. You stayed. You saw. You remembered who you are." I smiled. The sun broke through the clouds then, casting light across the garden, and I finally felt seen. 2 days later, Samantha asked if I could take Jamie to his pediatric appointment. "Mark's busy, and I have a facial," she said with a wave of her hand. I didn't argue. I knew Jamie was nervous about shots, and I always held his hand through them. We sat in the waiting room, linoleum floors, pastel walls, the smell of disinfectant and grape lollipops. Jamie squeezed my fingers as we waited, his legs swinging off the chair. When the nurse called us back, Samantha arrived out of nowhere, sunglasses still on inside, smiling too wide. "Thanks, Diane," she said, loud enough for the whole room. "I just didn't want Jamie to be alone with someone so forgetful." Heads turned. The nurse hesitated. I looked at Samantha. Her lips curled like she'd just played a perfect move in a silent war. I forced a smile. Well, thankfully, I remembered to bring his insurance card and his favorite sticker. Unlike someone who forgot her child was scared. Her face flushed, but she kept smiling. Still, I'll handle it from here. I turned to Jamie. Be brave, little man. I'll be right outside. As I stepped into the hallway, my cheeks burned, not from shame, but from the cruelty of it all. The way she used public moments to chip at me, make me small. But the receptionist caught my eye as I passed. She mouthed, You're doing great. A stranger's kindness. Simple. Real. Samantha could humiliate me all she wanted, but she couldn't break what was already reforging itself inside me. Later that week, I noticed it was missing. The photo. The one of Harold and me in front of the house, taken the day we moved in. His arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing, hair wild in the wind. It had sat on the mantel for decades, always. I looked twice, then a third time. Gone. I checked the bookshelf, the drawer where I sometimes placed it while dusting. Nothing. At dinner, I asked, calm and quiet, Has anyone seen the photo of your father? Samantha didn't look up. Oh, that old thing? It didn't match the decor anymore. I put it in storage. Storage? I repeated. Mark was silent, again. Jamie looked between us. I like that picture. Samantha smiled at him. We'll take a new one. Something more modern. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, opened box after box, hands shaking, breath tight. There it was, bent at the edge, face down in a bin of tangled Christmas lights. I held it to my chest and returned to the living room. Without a word, I placed it back on the mantel. Samantha said nothing, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. A small war, lost. That night I didn't cry. I cleaned the frame gently and whispered, I'm still here, Harold. I wore his locket to bed. They could try to erase him, try to erase me, but this house held our memory deeper than any frame, and I wasn't done protecting it. A few nights later, Samantha invited her friends over again, this time for what she called a wine and vision board evening. She used words like manifestation and legacy loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. Would you mind helping set up, Diane? She asked, all sugar and gloss in front of her guests. I nodded. Of course. I laid out her expensive cheese and crackers, polished the wine glasses, lit the candles she liked to pretend she picked out herself, even though they were mine, from Harold's retirement party. The women arrived in tall heels and tighter smiles. I served them invisible until one of them, a woman in a beige blazer and pearls, turned to me and asked, Do you work here? Before I could speak, Samantha chimed in, laughing. She's our resident matriarch, keeps things running when she remembers, right, Diane? A few of them chuckled. Mark, who'd been lingering at the edge of the room, said nothing. I looked at Samantha, her beauty, her charm, her performance. Then I took a breath and said clearly, Actually, I'm the one who paid the down payment on this house. Every brick in these walls was earned by my late husband and me. So no, I don't work here. I built here. Silence, uncomfortable, crisp. Samantha's face turned stiff. The woman in pearls looked down. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I walked to the kitchen, head high, let them sip their wine. I had just served them a truth none of them expected. 2 mornings later, I reached for the locket, my daily ritual now, part armor, part memory, and found the chain empty on my nightstand. The locket was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I tore through the drawers, checked behind the lamp, under the bed, even the laundry basket. Nothing. Panic rose, but I kept my hand steady. I stepped into the hallway. Samantha passed by, coffee in hand, casual smile playing on her lips. Lose something? She asked without stopping. I stared at her back. I'm missing something of great value, I replied. She shrugged. Maybe it slipped down the drain. Things get lost, especially when people get forgetful. That word again, forgetful, weaponized. Downstairs, Jamie tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, "Mommy took your necklace. I saw her hide it in her bathroom drawer." I knelt to his level. "Thank you, sweetheart. Can you show me?" He nodded, small and serious. While Samantha was out picking up Ella, Jamie and I crept into her bathroom. He pointed. I opened the drawer, and there it was. My locket, coiled like a captured truth beneath her curling iron. I took it back. Didn't say a word. Instead, I wrote a note. "You are not as clever as you believe." And I placed it where the locket had been. Samantha wanted to unmake me, steal my past to weaken my present. But she didn't know yet. I'd begun to remember just how strong I really was. The next day, I dressed in my best. A navy coat Harold bought me for our 30th anniversary, soft gloves, sensible heels. I told Samantha I was going to the pharmacy. She barely looked up from her phone. Instead, I went to the bank. I hadn't touched the joint account Harold and I had opened decades ago. I kept it separate from Mark's financial web, even when Samantha insisted I let her help manage things. I always said no, quietly, firmly. The manager, Mr. Whitaker, remembered me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said kindly, it's been a while." I handed him my documents, including Harold's revised will and the notarized copy Grace helped me prepare. "I'd like to update the beneficiaries on this account," I said. "Remove my son, add my grandchildren." He raised his eyebrows. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. I want to ensure their future is protected, not mismanaged." He processed the request without question. At the end, he slid a folder across the desk. "Here's your updated statement. You've done something wise, Mrs. Wilson. I left the bank lighter than I'd felt in years. At a coffee shop nearby, I sat by the window with a cup of Earl Grey and watched the world pass by. Mothers with strollers, old men reading newspapers, teenagers giggling. For once, I wasn't rushing back to serve someone else. I wasn't waiting to be needed. I was taking steps. Steps toward a version of myself I thought I had buried with Harold. That evening, I noticed a new calendar pinned to the fridge. Samantha's doing, no doubt. Color-coded and aggressively organized. In bold marker, she had written across the date 2 weeks from now. "Moving day. Confirm Diane's transfer." I stared at the word transfer like it was a punishment, like I was luggage being shipped off. Mark walked in behind me, carrying a glass of wine. He saw me reading and paused. "You weren't supposed to see that," he muttered. "But I did," I said quietly. He leaned against the counter. "Samantha's just trying to plan. She says it's best for everyone. Do you believe that?" He looked down into his glass like it held the answers he hadn't dared ask himself. "I don't know," he said. I walked over and pointed at the calendar. "I'm not going anywhere, Mark. This house is mine. Your father made sure of it. And I'm telling you now, you're going to lose more than a house if you keep letting her speak for you." He flinched. I left him there, in the kitchen's quiet hum. Later that night, I took a red pen and wrote in the margins beneath Samantha's plan. "Not happening. Mom." I wanted her to see it, to feel the shift. This wasn't defiance. It was a declaration. They had mistaken my silence for surrender, but I was no longer silent, and I was no longer theirs to manage. The day after the calendar incident, Samantha decided to cook dinner, an unusual gesture. She called it a cleansing meal, full of kale and quinoa and things the children hated but were forced to eat with pinched noses. She plated the food carefully, arranging arugula like art. 4 plates sat on the table, one for Mark, one for each child, and one for her. There was no plate for me. I stood by the counter, unnoticed, invisible in the home I once built with calloused hands and dreams scraped together during lean years. Jamie looked up. "Grandma," Samantha cut in. "She already ate," she lied smoothly, slicing into her roasted squash. "Didn't you, Diane?" Mark froze, fork mid-air. I looked at him. Did I? He didn't meet my eyes, just took a sip of water and stared at his plate. I said nothing. I didn't make a scene. I walked to the kitchen, took a slice of bread, and buttered it slowly, deliberately, standing with my back to them. They kept eating. All of them. Even Mark, except Jamie. He left half his plate untouched and joined me quietly, chewing beside me like we were our own secret tribe. Later, as I did the dishes alone, I whispered to the soapy water, "They will remember this. One day, when I'm gone, they'll remember this night, and it will taste bitter." Because the deepest kind of cruelty isn't loud, it's silence, and hunger, and being unseen. But I was documenting everything now. The truth would be fed. 3 days later, Grace came to the house, not for tea, but with a mission. She walked in with her cane tapping sharp against the hardwood, her portfolio tucked beneath her arm like a sword. Samantha raised an eyebrow when she opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Grace said, voice polite but cool. "You can step aside. I have legal business with Diane." Samantha blinked. "Legal? I'm her representative," Grace said firmly, brushing past her. Mark looked up from the living room, stunned. "Mom, what's going on?" I stood from the dining table, calm, collected. "You both forgot something important. I may be older, but I'm not powerless." Grace placed the documents on the table with precision. "These are notices. From this moment forward, any attempts to alter Diane's living arrangements, finances, or property without her written consent will be considered elder abuse and prosecuted as such." Samantha's face drained of color. "You can't be serious." "I am," Grace replied, straightening her back. "And so is the court." Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he looked like the boy I raised, frightened, confused, and lost. Samantha scoffed. "This is absurd." "No," I said, finally stepping forward. "What's absurd is you thinking I'd just fade away." Jamie peeked around the corner, eyes wide. Grace leaned closer to Samantha. "We have witnesses, records, proof. Try anything and we will bury you in truth." Samantha said nothing. Grace smiled. "Good, then we understand each other." And just like that, the house exhaled. A shift had begun. That evening, after the kids were in bed and Samantha had locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of wine, Mark knocked on my door. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, but I didn't stop him either. He sat down on the edge of the bed, like he used to when he was 10 and afraid of thunderstorms. The room smelled of lavender and lemon polish, the way Harold liked it. The locket sat on my chest, still warm from the day. "I didn't know it had gotten this bad," Mark said softly. "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just chose not to see it." He rubbed his hands together, looked down. I thought keeping the peace was helping. "No, Mark," I said, my voice even. "You kept her comfortable, not us, not your children. You let her humiliate me in the home your father and I built. I didn't mean—" "I know what you didn't mean. I also know what you allowed." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom." I nodded. "Sorry is a start. But protection is better. Action is better." He looked up. "What do you want me to do?" I stood and walked to my dresser. Took out a folded sheet of paper, the revised will, the flash drive, and Grace's business card. "Protect your children," I said, "and decide if you want to be their father or her puppet." He took the papers with shaking hands, and for the first time in years, I saw a crack in his silence, maybe even something growing behind it. The next morning, I came down to find the kitchen door locked, not just closed, locked from the inside. I jiggled the knob, knocked once. No answer. Mark came down a minute later, eyebrows furrowed. "Why is the kitchen locked?" Before I could speak, Samantha appeared from the hallway, arms crossed, still in her robe. "I needed space. You all keep walking in here, making messes." Mark looked at her, stunned. "You locked out my mother?" "She's always in there," Samantha snapped. "It's overwhelming." I stepped forward, calm, steady. "That's my kitchen. That door hasn't had a key in 20 years. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "I found it." Mark's voice rose, not in rage, but in something harder. "Open the door, Samantha." She hesitated, then slowly turned the key and stepped aside. The room looked the same, but felt different, like a boundary had been violated. A silent war had spilled into the physical. I walked to the stove, placed my hand on it like touching a wounded friend. "Don't ever lock me out of my own home again." Samantha scoffed. "Well, maybe that won't be a problem much longer." Mark turned to her. "Enough." She blinked, surprised. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just didn't side with her. And in our house, that was new. Later that day, I changed the locks on the kitchen and the front door. Grace had already drafted the ownership transfer block. Samantha could try to build her own fortress, but this one would no longer shelter her storms. That evening, dinner was quiet. Too quiet. The children ate silently, casting glances between the adults. I served soup and bread with care, each movement measured, deliberate. The tension hung thick, like steam that wouldn't lift from the windows. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom's staying permanently." Samantha dropped her spoon with a clatter. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "She owns this house. You knew that. And now there's legal protection in place." She stood slowly. "So that's it? You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing what's right," he said. "And I'm choosing not to be a coward anymore." She stared at him. Her eyes narrowed, her breath quickening. Then in one swift motion, she reached for a plate, my good china, Harold's favorite pattern, and threw it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. Ella gasped. Jamie started to cry. I stood, calm. "Samantha," I said gently, "leave the children out of this." "You think you've won?" she spat. "No," I said, stepping forward. "I think I've survived. That's different." She stormed out of the room, heels clicking down the hall like angry punctuation. Mark followed her, not to console, but to contain. I knelt down beside Jamie, wiped his tears. "It's all right, baby. Some things break, but not everything needs to stay broken." Ella handed me a broom. We swept the mess together quietly, piece by piece, because this house may have cracks, but it still stood, and so did I. The next morning, as I packed Jamie's lunch, the way I always did, with a small note tucked inside reminding him to be brave, something odd fell from his backpack. An envelope. My name on the front, written in blocky, childish letters. Inside was a drawing, our house, with hearts floating above it. Me standing by the front door smiling, Jamie beside me holding my hand. In the corner, a single line in crayon. "I want Grandma to stay forever." My throat tightened. I sat at the kitchen table, holding the paper like it was made of glass, of hope, of everything I had fought for. Samantha breezed in moments later, digging for her car keys. "Have you seen my mascara? I swear this house eats my things." I didn't respond. She glanced at the drawing and sneered. "Oh, sweet, he's getting clingy." "No," I said softly, folding the picture and placing it in my pocket. "He's feeling safe." She looked at me, trying to gauge what cards I still had left. She didn't know I wasn't playing a game anymore. "I hope you're enjoying your little victory," she said coolly. I smiled, standing slowly. "It's not a victory, it's a home. For the first time in years, it feels like one again." She scoffed and walked away, but I remained still, fingers brushing the crayon drawing in my pocket. Proof that children see through lies, that love drawn with shaky hands can be stronger than manipulation written in ink. That night, long after bedtime, I heard a gentle knock at my door. "Grandma?" Ella's voice was a whisper. "Come in, sweetheart." She slipped in wearing her flannel pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one I stitched years ago when she was just a baby. "I heard Mommy yelling again," she said, eyes wide. "I pretended I was asleep, but Jamie cried." I opened my arms, and she crawled into them without hesitation. Her head rested against my shoulder like it had so many nights before. "I don't like it when she says mean things about you," she whispered. "She told Daddy you were trying to take us away." I closed my eyes, held her tighter. "She's wrong," I said. "I'm trying to keep us together." Ella pulled something from her pocket. A key. Small, old, tarnished. "I found this in Mommy's jewelry box," she said. "She was hiding it under her socks." I took it carefully. It was the key to the downstairs study. Harold's room, long sealed. Samantha had no reason to have it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She nodded, brave and tired. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" "I'm not going anywhere." As I tucked her back into bed, I realized something. The children weren't just witnesses. They were keepers of truth. And when the time came, their memories would be the final word in this story. I slipped the key onto my necklace beside the locket. One more piece of strength, one more secret coming to light. At dawn, I crept downstairs, the key from Ella hanging beside my locket, a quiet, clinking promise of revelation. The study door was just as Harold had left it before he died. Oak frame, brass handle, the smell of dust and pipe tobacco lingering in the air like a ghost that never stopped waiting. I turned the key. It clicked. Inside, the room was dim but intact. His desk, his books, the photo of our wedding day still perched beside a fossilized coffee cup. Everything exactly as he left it, except for one thing. A file box on the floor, unlocked. Inside, I found documents, life insurance papers, bank ledgers, and a letter addressed to Mark and Diane. The letter read, "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I knew Samantha wasn't safe. I saw how she looked at our home, not as a place to love, but to own. If Mark has lost his way, I hope he finds it again. But if he doesn't, Diane, you protect those grandbabies, you protect yourself. This house is yours. You are its heart, and I've left you everything you need to make sure they can't take it from you. Trust Grace, trust yourself, and never let anyone dim your light." I sat in his chair, clutching the paper like his hand was still wrapped around mine. He knew, even back then, and he had prepared a fortress in ink and foresight. Now I had every tool I needed. 2 days later, Samantha burst through the front door, a manila envelope clutched in her hand, and rage boiling in her voice. "I just got off the phone with the lawyer," she spat. "You really went behind our backs and changed everything." Mark stood behind her, stunned but silent. "I didn't go behind anyone's back," I said, folding the dish towel I'd been using. "I just stopped letting you rewrite the ending." She slammed the envelope on the counter. "You're trying to take everything from us." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were copies of the blocked deed transfer, my notarized will, and the footage from the camcorder. Grace had sent them to both of them. "I'm protecting what was already mine," I said, locking eyes with her. "And what Harold and I built." "You vindictive old—" "Don't!" Mark cut in, his voice shaking. "Don't finish that sentence." She turned to him. "You're really siding with her?" He nodded. "I should have done it years ago." Samantha's face cracked, not with sadness, but with realization. She wasn't in control anymore. "You can't keep me from my kids," she hissed. "No," I said. "But if you ever lay a hand on them again, if you ever lie about me again, you will lose them." Mark stepped forward. "Pack a bag, Sam. Go stay with your sister. We need space." She stared at him like he'd struck her. But this time, the silence wasn't mine. It was hers. And for once, it was louder than anything she'd ever said. Samantha left that evening. No storm, no apology, just the sound of her suitcase wheels bumping against the steps and the front door clicking shut behind her. No one followed. Not even Mark. The silence that settled over the house was a new kind of silence. Not tight with tension, but open. Light filtered differently through the windows. Even the floorboards seemed to creak with relief. Jamie ran into the kitchen in his socks. "Grandma, can we make pancakes?" I smiled. We can make anything we want. Ella helped me crack the eggs. Mark joined us halfway through, taking over the whisk like he'd done when he was little and thought it made him strong. We sat together at the kitchen table for the first time in months, maybe years. No lectures, no criticism, just maple syrup and messy laughter. After breakfast, I found Mark in the living room staring at the photo I'd returned to the mantel. She always hated that picture, he said quietly. She hated what it represented, I replied. Roots, love, a home that couldn't be bought. He nodded slowly. I don't know how I let it go this far. You were scared, I said. But fear doesn't absolve us. It only delays the truth. He looked at me then, really looked. I want to do better. Then start now, I said. With them, with yourself. The house, the walls, the memories, they were still here. And finally, so was he. A week later, I visited Grace at her home just outside town, a quaint cottage wrapped in roses and stubborn ivy. We sat beneath the arbor, the late autumn sun warming our hands as birds chirped above like gossiping neighbors. She poured us tea. How's the air in that house now? Lighter, I said. Like it remembers what it was built for. Grace smiled. And Samantha? Gone, for now. Mark's trying. The children are thriving. She nodded. Poetic justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just silence where there used to be chaos. I took a sip of tea and gazed at her garden. Strong, blooming, wild in all the right places. I keep thinking of that day in the dry cleaners, I said. Mr. Adler saw what I was trying so hard to ignore. We always see it, Grace said softly. But it takes courage to name it, to resist the slow erasure. I reached into my bag and pulled out the drawing Jamie made, the one of me standing beside our house with hearts in the sky. He drew this before Samantha left, I whispered. That's the only legacy I care about now. Grace leaned over and touched my hand. You didn't just survive, Diane. You healed a house. You saved a family. I blinked back tears. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't mourning what had been lost. I was grateful for what had been saved. One afternoon, as the children napped and Mark trimmed the hedges outside, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved, but knew instantly. Samantha. The message was short. You've poisoned them against me. I hope you're happy. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart still. Not from fear, not from pain, but from clarity. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked upstairs to the drawer where I kept the locket, Harold's letters, and Jamie's drawing. I opened it slowly, as if inviting the truth to breathe with me. She hadn't been poisoned. She had been revealed. And her reflection was not what she wanted to see. Later that evening, I printed the message and filed it away with everything else. Grace had taught me well. Keep records, protect peace, guard against shadows that might return with softer voices. At bedtime, Jamie asked, Is Mommy coming back? I tucked him in, kissed his forehead. Maybe one day, but only if she remembers how to be kind. Ella chimed in from her bed. You won't leave, right? Never, I said, voice steady. This is our home. Downstairs, Mark cleaned the dishes without being asked. Upstairs, the moonlight touched the locket resting on my nightstand. I had faced storms. I had buried the old rules. And now, even the echoes of cruelty couldn't shake what had been rebuilt. That weekend, we gathered in the backyard, Mark, the children, and I, with a young magnolia tree bundled in burlap. It had been Harold's favorite, one he'd always said he'd plant once he retired, though he never got around to it. Mark dug the hole while Jamie played in the dirt, and Ella brought out a small watering can. I held the tree's base steady as Mark shoveled, the soil rich and dark beneath our hands. We're really doing this, he said. I smiled. It's time. We placed the tree into the earth, its roots stretching downward like it already knew this was home. Ella poured water around the base, her eyes serious. Will it bloom soon? In the spring, I said. Everything does, eventually. Mark wiped his brow. It's beautiful, Mom. He'd love this. I nodded, my throat tightening. He would. Before we went inside, I took Harold's letter, the one he'd written to both Mark and me, and tucked a copy into a small, waterproof box. Then quietly, I placed it beneath the roots. A part of him would always be here, not just in memory, but in something living, something that would bloom long after we were gone. Jamie hugged my waist. This tree will be ours forever. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. Forever. The magnolia stood tall, already reaching toward the sky, just like we were. That night, after the children were asleep and the dishes had been cleared, I sat in my room alone, not lonely, just still. The locket lay warm against my chest, its chain slightly worn from the months of silent battles. I unclasped it slowly and walked to the old photo of Harold and me on the mantel. I opened the back of the frame and placed the locket inside. Not as a goodbye, but as a promise. A return. A closing of a chapter that would now rest in memory. This house no longer needed a talisman. It had breath again, laughter, forgiveness, even strength in the stillness. Mark stood behind me, quiet. You're putting it away? For now, I said, turning. The fight's over. He nodded, then stepped forward. I want you to know I see you now. I see everything I missed. I placed my hand on his cheek, the way I used to when he was small and full of fire. Then make it count. The lights dimmed low, casting golden shadows across the room. In the distance, the magnolia tree rustled in the wind, roots settling deeper into the earth. This house, this family, we had bent but not broken. Harold would be proud, and so was I. The next morning I woke early, before the children stirred, before Mark's coffee brewed. The house was quiet, bathed in soft golden light filtering through windows I'd cleaned myself just days before. I padded through the hallways barefoot, touching walls that once held so much tension. Now they simply stood, honest, solid. In the kitchen, a note from Mark sat on the table. Meeting Grace at 11 to finalize everything. Thank you for not giving up on me. Beside it, a fresh bouquet of wild flowers from the garden. Simple, sincere. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard. The magnolia tree stood steady, leaves shimmering in the morning breeze. Ella had tied a ribbon around its trunk. Jamie had placed a rock with Grandpa's tree, painted in crooked letters at its base. I sat in the rocking chair Harold had made, the one I hadn't touched in years. It creaked just the same, like an old friend sighing hello. The sky was soft blue, the kind that doesn't demand attention but stays with you all day. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like I had to defend my space, my worth, or my name. The home was mine again, not just by law, by love. That evening, as twilight settled over the neighborhood, the house glowed. Every window lit, warm like candlelight. Jamie read on the couch, curled under a quilt. Ella practiced her spelling at the dining table, tongue between her teeth. Mark prepared dinner without being asked, apron dusted in flour. And I sat at the window, watching the last of the sunlight fade behind the magnolia tree. A breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the garden. Somewhere down the block, wind chimes whispered softly. I closed my eyes and listened. Not for threats, not for footsteps, just for peace. The locket now rested behind the photo frame on the mantel. The key from Ella dangled beside the kitchen window, catching light and memory with every sway. Harold's voice lived in the grain of the floorboards, in the swing of the back door, in the quiet love stitched into every corner of this house. I smiled, because this wasn't just survival. It was reclamation. It was dignity. It was justice. Not the kind with gavel and robe, but the quiet kind. The kind that looks like a grandmother still standing, still loving, still needed. As I turned off the lights one by one, I whispered into the calm, You were right, Harold. They didn't break me. The final light I left on was the one in the window by the magnolia. A signal, a symbol, that this home, this woman, this legacy would not be dimmed.